I'm the Reverend Bri-anne Swan, and this is Sermons from the East End for Tuesday, March 26th, 2024. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Like most Catholic and Protestant Christians, East End United celebrated Palm Sunday a couple of days ago. Jesus arrived in our sanctuary to the waving of purple cloth and rainbow ribbons. We walked in a parade, and we wondered about how a week that started as a celebration could turn so very wrong. When they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and her colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, just say this, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, saying, "Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble, and mounted on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of the donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and that followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David!
Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven!" Like that?
When he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking,
"Who is this?"
The crowds were saying, "This is the prophet, Jesus, from Nazareth in Galilee." Matthew chapter 26, verses 1 through 5. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. "But not during the festival," they said, "or there may be a riot among the people." Our first reading is a vintage recording from the very first Lockdown Brothers video ever. Lockdown Brothers was the series of Bible shorts my kids and I made when we were socially distancing during the pandemic. That recording is from spring of 2020, when we thought the kids were only going to be out of school for a few extra weeks after March break. And when I look back at those videos now, I cannot help but wonder, were my kids ever so tiny? We are a people of story. And perhaps this past Sunday of all days, where we hear about Jesus entering Jerusalem to shouts of joy and hope, the power of our stories becomes very clear. But before we get into that story, first, I need to tell you this story. It is a story that begins on the very first nice day of spring, when my kids were even tinier. Isaiah was 3 and Simon was 1. It was a beautiful day, a stunning day. Winter was over and it was time to celebrate. So I piled both kids into our double stroller and set out for a long walk towards the lake in search of ice cream. These were the kinds of excursions we lived for: ice cream and time at the park. A few blocks from our house, we started to come across something large, fuzzy, and very, very still. As we got closer, I realized it was a raccoon, and it was very dead. I am always sad when I see dead animals on the side of the road, and had I been walking by myself, I would have probably done something. Called the city to have them come and remove it, find something to move the poor thing to a place with less foot traffic. But unfortunately, I wasn't alone. And so my first instinct was to turn around or to cross the road so Isaiah and Simon didn't have to see the carnage. But before I could do that, I heard Isaiah's sweet little voice speak up. "Look, Mama, that raccoon is sleeping on the sidewalk. Shh. Don't wake her up." Now it was fairly obvious that this raccoon had met a violent end. And I could have left it. I could have just said, "You're up funny that," and went on with our day. But I thought about our old man cat who probably only had a few years left with us. And I thought of my father, who had only recently been diagnosed with cancer, and we were waiting to hear about his prognosis. And so I thought, perhaps having a conversation about a dead raccoon might be the gentlest entry into a conversation about loss I could possibly hope to have. Better a dead raccoon than our beloved family pet or a grandparent. And so I took a deep breath. "Isaiah, honey, that raccoon is not sleeping. That raccoon is dead." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, pondering this. He had watched movies before where the characters died. I mean, every single Disney movie seems to feature an orphan or two. But for Isaiah, the solution to all of this was really quite simple. Kiss her better. Pardon me? Just kiss her better, Mama, like you do with me. And staring at that bleeding, broken raccoon, my heart cracked right then and there. Because, of course, no matter how powerful and how healing my kisses are, I cannot fix a dead raccoon. Honey, that raccoon is dead, and dead is forever. And then we went over what happens when people and animals die. Their heart stops beating, their lungs stop breathing, and their body stops moving. Isaiah became concerned, so together we felt his heart, his lungs, and his body. He did a little dance. We assured ourselves that he was indeed alive. And then we did the same with me. This was all developmentally appropriate stuff, but it was not lost on me how a celebration of ice cream on the beach had suddenly shifted to something far deeper. And still, he didn't understand why I wouldn't kiss the raccoon. Why I wouldn't at least try. And I finally had to tell him that Mama's kisses can't fix everything. Mama's kisses can't fix dead. And that, I think, was the hardest part of the whole scene. Understanding that dead is forever is one thing. Suddenly being confronted that there are just some things Mama can't fix on her own. That is where the heartbreak lived. So here we are. We started this time with a celebration. We started with a parade and singing. Jesus enters Jerusalem like a rock star. And possibly he's entering Jerusalem at the same time Pilate is returning to the city to his own parade. However, if Pilate is also in town, his parade is a demonstration of might, of imperial strength. Jesus enters with the hopes and dreams of his people paving the path before him. But a lot of things will happen over the next few days. Judas will betray his friend. The religious elite, some of whom have actually been trying to protect Jesus, will become nervous. Jesus and the crowds who surround him will become too dangerous. And so, in keeping with the circumstances, context, and time, the end result is torture and execution at the hands of the Roman state. A bleeding and broken man hanging from a cross, the cross. It is the crux of our story. And Christians have spent almost 2,000 years trying to work out the meaning of it all. Isaiah spent months, literally months, working out his feelings about this dead raccoon experience. One day, we went to the library and he asked if he could take home a book about raccoons. We couldn't find any, so we asked the library worker for help. When she found a book, Isaiah looked at it and asked, "Is this a book about alive raccoons?" And when the library worker looked confused, he went on, "Because I really need a book about dead raccoons." So deep and honest was his 3-year-old desire to make sense of what seemed completely outside of his conceptual framework. How is it possible that my mama, who has always made everything better with a hug or a kiss or a tickle, cannot fix this raccoon? How is it possible that a God whose chosen people are aching can send their anointed one not to vanquish, but to a brutal and shameful death? We have reflected on a lot together at East End United over these past 6 weeks of Lent. Reflected on journeys of change. We've been creating a communal art piece together, the paint and the images resonating with pieces of us. We started with a blank canvas, and now we have a multimedia piece that we cannot wait to hang on the wall, a visual map and record of the season. And now we are coming to the end. Holy Week. In preparation for this week, I started to go through the many books in my house and have taken account of the many different interpretations of what this scandalous end means. There are just too many different understandings to name here, just so many books. Books written by authors who believe that the world and everybody in it was so bad that God needed somebody to die in order to pay for it all. Books by authors who believe that we had here a man with so much love and truth to impart that those in power felt threatened, and so they killed him. With 2 ministers sharing one house and more than a few retiring clergy friends, we have rather a lot of books. More books than we have shelf space for. So many authors writing so many books, trying to make sense of the death of this one man. But then I found another book. It starts out, "Once upon a time, there was a dead raccoon." And I was reminded of that conversation 9 years ago, and how much Isaiah had to work through, and how part of working it out for him was writing about it. He wrote an entire series of stories trying to make sense of the death of this one raccoon. Before I sang him a lullaby at night, together we would make up stories about raccoons. Sometimes they were alive, and sometimes they weren't. Because the whole thing moved him. The raccoon was killed. She didn't do anything wrong, but the world killed her anyway. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. It must have really hurt. And Mama couldn't make it better. So he wrote about it, to make sense of it. The Gospel according to Isaiah. Now I'm willing to wager that most of you know this is not where our story ends. And I promise next week's sermon will not be titled Roadkill and the Resurrection. But this is where we leave things for today. Jesus doesn't do anything wrong, and the world kills him anyway. It isn't right. It isn't fair. It must have really hurt. And his Mama, holy or otherwise, cannot make it better. At least, not in the way his friends want or expect. Amen. If I could kiss it better than I would, if I could make the earth move as it should, I would hold you in my arms as the world sounds its alarm. But I can't kiss it better. If I could kiss it better than I would, simply mend the broken hearts now if I could, I would keep you safe and warm just to weather out this storm. But I can't kiss it better. I know it isn't right, makes no sense not to see your mama's care. I know it really hurts, feeling broken and alone. And all I want is to kiss it better. But if I could kiss it better, then I would. If I could make the crowd move as it should, I would hold you in my arms as the crowd screams their alarm. If I could kiss it better, then I would. East End United Regional Ministry is committed to supporting our neighbours throughout the East End of Toronto. We run a weekly food bank market out of our Glen Roads campus on Gerrard Street, as well as out of the cold from our Eastminster campus on Danforth Avenue. We actively support refugees and asylum seekers, and are public, intentional, and explicit of our affirmation and advocacy for two-spirited and LGBTQIA+ peoples. We gather for worship on-site and online Sunday mornings at our Eastminster campus and Thursday evenings at our Glen Roads campus. We are a community working to figure out how to embody the words of Cornel West, who said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." We don't always get it right, but we are committed to working for progress even as we acknowledge that we are a work in progress. If any of this sounds interesting, we would love to meet you. Feel free to send me, Reverend Bri-anne, an email, bswan, BSWAN, at eastendunited.ca. I would love to connect over coffee, either in person or online. Thank you for listening to this week's sermon. We will be back next week, Easter Sunday, journeying with Mary as she discovers an empty tomb and risks the daring hope that maybe, just maybe, everything is okay. If you've been enjoying listening to our sermons in podcast format, please consider subscribing and leaving a review in your podcast player of choice. It really helps us out a lot. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. East End United Regional Ministry is an affirming community of faith within the United Church of Canada. You can learn more about our community, including our many outreach programs, by going to www.eastendunited.ca.